things about the OMA organization is the connections that you end up making. I actually made a really good connection, and that's what got me here, quite serendipitously, actually. And the connection that I made with Michael was equally serendipitous. I attended a workshop that was hosted by the African American Historical and Genealogical Society, which is something, I was looking for something to do on a Saturday afternoon. I saw that, I signed up, and I showed up. And I was amazed. I was amazed. Michael wasn't the only speaker there, but when it came down to us making a choice of what workshop we were going to go to, I chose to go to Michael's because I found his story was just absolutely intriguing. He talked about his journey from foster care and sealed adoption records and DNA testing and rice. And that rice thing just really took it to a whole nother level. So I'm very, very happy to be able to introduce the gentleman. He is, I'm gonna read his official bio. In his work, Michael educates families on how to retrace, reconnect, and reunite family and kinship ties through DNA testing. With his strong passion for family, Michael's work caters to the holistic needs of family and community across all walks of life. May is the National Fostercare Awareness Month, and he'd like to share a personal testimony of how he survived the trauma of foster care and displacement to arrive at a place of assurance and purpose and groundedness. Michael.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me well? Okay, good. Okay. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I know that it's Thursday, and I just want everyone here to know that we can all breathe happy now because the Pennsylvania primaries are done. You made it, we made it, and let the chips fall where they may. But I'm so honored to be here tonight because I know that OMA is really committed to the holistic needs of the community, and what OMA does and what I specialize in really comes together and then fits with our efforts to really try to connect people and to really take them on a holistic journey. I'm here tonight to share with you how I was drawn from troubled waters. That is the talk for tonight. And some of what I will share with you tonight will make you laugh. Some things that I share tonight will maybe make you cry. And it's okay. It's a very rich story. And what I want you to do tonight is I want you to see yourself in the journey because we're all evolving. We've all come to the table have experienced and that we're still evolving from. You're better today than you were yesterday. Is that right? And we're going to continue to be on this trajectory of becoming the best versions of ourselves. And so I want us to stand up. I believe in audience participation, and I want to do a sing-along, because it's going to really set the tone for our discussion tonight. And how many of you here are familiar with the Negro spiritual, wade in the water? All right, so let's begin. Well, let me start it, and you can follow along in the second verse. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Sing. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Sing it one more time. Yeah. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna the water. I've traveled across many rivers to be with you here tonight. And I come from a culture that recognizes that ancestry connects with the present. And so allow me to walk you through the generations from one river to the next. From long ago, I started out in Eastern Africa along the Nile River. And there were great empires built there. And as it were, people migrated. Farming needs, opportunities to build other networks. And so my people traveled from Eastern Africa into Western Africa along the trans-Saharan trade routes. And they settled along the great River Niger. But you see, although many great civilizations grew in that particular part of Africa, trouble came. Oh yes, the waters became troubled. You see, what happened was ships came and they took my ancestors and they carried them across the Atlantic. And when we made it across the Atlantic, we settled along the Carolinas, and we toiled and we tilled the land along the Eno and the Edisto rivers. And even then, as the family began to be sold upriver and downriver, families were broken, names were changed, histories were forever lost because of the constant change of being transported from one location to the next. Father was separated from mother. Child was separated from their parents and their kinship networks. And so we do what all people do when trauma hits us. We made the best of it. And so when the opportunity to see our North Star came, we got on the first train up north. And we followed that North Star during the Great Migration era. And we settled along the Hudson River. That's where New York is situated. And so 2 generations from that point, I was born. I was born in Far Rockaway, Queens, New York, right along the peninsula there, but it feeds right off of the Hudson River. You may be seated. And so when I say I've traveled across many rivers to be with you tonight, I'm speaking as an echo from the ancestral realm, but tonight we are having this encounter along the 3 rivers that meets at the point. And so sometimes in life, we have to endure. Sometimes we have to wait in the valley until the storm passes over. But then, if we hold on, we will be able to persevere and press our way up to the mountaintop. And then we can tell the story of how we overcame. How many of you here tonight knows anything about National Fostercare Awareness Month? Let me see a show of hands. Well, let me share with you. Since 1988, former President Ronald Reagan actually enacted the month, he designated the month of May to be the month to create this awareness throughout the country and the world about the state of our child welfare system. And I think it's just so interesting because I I was born in the month of November, and November, for any of you out there who might be November babies, that happens to be National Adoption Awareness Month. But I was telling some of you here tonight that 7 years ago, I learned that May actually is National Foster Care Awareness Month. And as I was preparing for tonight, I was thinking about my journey through foster care because I actually, shortly after I was born, I was placed in foster care and traveled through 9 different non-relative homes. Now, I don't know how many of you here tonight work in child welfare or do any sort of social work. Let me see a show of hands. Anyone here? Okay. So some of you will be able to appreciate some of these statistics. As I prepared for tonight's lecture, I noticed that when I went on to the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis Report, it's otherwise known as the AFCAR report, there were some staggering statistics that really kind of raised an awareness like, wow, families are really in crisis today. For example, nationally, there's anywhere between 437,000 children that are in foster care right now. And sometimes it fluctuates between that and about 500,000, 500,000. But in that, you have close to about 55% of children who are entering in the system who are of Caucasian, European ancestral mix. And then you have about 23% of children of African American descent that's in there. And then of course you have your Hispanics, which are at about 20%, and then you have other. But what's interesting is that African American children are incredibly overrepresented in the system. They are the least to exit the system compared to their white counterparts, Hispanics, and Asian counterparts. And most of these out-of-home placements, there were statistics that suggest that around 45% of these children are being placed in non-relative homes where the child doesn't really have a family or genealogical connection to the home. But I will say this, although there's a lesser percentage of children who are actually in care with their own family, they call that kinship care, most of the adoptions that are happening are non-relative adoptions. And something happens when an adoption goes in that direction because then the receiving family has the option to have the child's records completely changed. And it's really a mandate from the courts. See, I went through a closed adoption. I was in care from the time I was born until about 11 months. And during that time, I passed through 9 different homes, and they were all non-relative. And they were all extremely abusive. And so by the... Yes, from the time I was born to 11 months. And there are some resources that would suggest that in early childhood, the first 5 to 6 years of a child's life is absolutely important to make sure that they are fully, secure. But when you consider that most of our children who enter into the foster care system are entering because of some issue of neglect or abuse, let's be clear about that. But what's interesting is that when I got to the point where I was available for adoption, the option that the courts recommended was that, okay, if he's going to be placed in the Williams homestead, then he's going to have his birth certificate changed and his health records sealed. Because the goal was permanency, right? So they achieved that. But the consequence of that was that there was a whole history that would have been lost. I was born into a Creole West Indian family, but I was adopted into a family who was very proud of their African American Irish heritage. So all I was exposed to and all I knew was that particular history. What preceded adoption didn't come to the forefront until a chance encounter at the age of 18. And before I get to that, I want to say this. All was well until I found this summer camp certificate. I was about 12 years old. And I remember when I found this certificate, I said, wow. I said, why is my name listed Michael Harth and not Michael Williams? Because as far as I knew, I was born and raised into the family. And I remember I marched upstairs because I went downstairs and my mother had this huge bookshelf. And she had like this encyclopedias from A through Z. It was the red and black kind. Y'all remember that? And I mean, it was like, wow. And I remember I used to love to look through the family photo albums. And I would just stare at the black and white photos and I would just turn the page and I'm like, wow, who is that? And wow, oh my gosh, look how big their noses are. And I wasn't able to see myself in many of the images that I saw in these pictures. But nonetheless, I was still intrigued by it all. And then when I turned to the second to last page in that photo album, I said, I remember this certificate. And I pulled it out of the sleeve to get a real good look. And it said, congratulations to Michael Harth. And I said, how could Mom miss this? This has got to be a mistake. This has got to be a mistake. So I marched upstairs and I said, Mom, do you remember this certificate? And why do they have my name, Michael Raymond Harth? She said, where did you get that? And I remember in that moment, I felt like I did something wrong. And I said, well, I got it from the family photo album. Well, that was the day that I learned the truth, that I had came to the family as an adopted child, as a foster child first, and then I had been adopted into the family. And that began my journey of discovery. And unfortunately, during the time that my mother had me as a foster child, information was not fluid. We're talking the late 70s, under the Jimmy Carter presidency. So there was a lot going on, a lot of drugs and stuff going on. Not saying that my biological family was involved in it. Actually, my birth mother worked for the child welfare system, the same system that I ended up in. She was a dictaphone typist, so she was very skilled at typing shorthand. And so because she was a single black woman trying to raise a child of her own, and she was an epileptic. So these few things were really working, against her. And so the pressures of life caused her to buckle. And so now she's labeled an unfit mother. And that's what caused me to be taken out of the home. And when that separation occurred, and this is all of what my adopted mother knew, and she continued to explain to me how once that separation occurred, I never ended up going back. And I started off in Queens, circulating around certain foster homes there, and then they finally contacted Angel Guardian Home, which was a Catholic orphanage, and then they made the call to the Williams family, who had a pretty solid reputation because they had cared for over 65 inner city orphans. So they had that established reputation, and they had 7 children of their own. So this idea of being available to be a helping hand is all a part of foster care, because it really is about a community effort. Even though I'm coming from Queens and they're based in Brooklyn, we met in the middle. Wouldn't you agree that family can be such an elastic concept? It can include and fold so many people. And I'm so grateful for it because it allowed me to rise above the circumstances that I had been born into. But little did I know that I would actually have the chance to retrace myself and go back. With just 4 pieces of information that I found over the years of badgering my mother, Mom, what else do you know about my story? What else? What else? She gave me 4 significant pieces of information. She said, well, the orphanage that handled your adoption was Angel Guardian Home. And there's something to that Angel Guardian Home. They have a very long history in dealing with child welfare. Then she said, we know that you were from Queens. And of course, I knew the last name Harth. And then of course, she said you had an unnamed sister who was 13 years older than you. And I said, okay, all right, good, I can do this, I can do this. So there I was, Thanksgiving Eve. The year is 1996. And that year, excuse me, that year was an incredible year. First of all, I graduated from high school. Yay, okay? I'm like excited, okay? And it was just totally awesome. Prom was great, you know, graduation was exciting. And then we were in the Olympics. Do you remember that? Gloria Estefan had that hit song, Reach. And I used to love hearing that song. She would say, if I could reach higher. And I'm telling you, I just felt so empowered by that song. And she would say, if I put my spirit to the test, if I could reach higher. And it really compelled me to try. And so I did. I said, well, this is the day, Thanksgiving Eve, 1996, I'm going to try to find my family, my first family. And I used a $5 calling card that had 20 minutes remaining. Within 20 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, my life was changed. It was changed when I called directory assistance and I asked them, can I have at least 5 numbers under the last name Harth? Well, sir, do you have a first name? I'm like, no, I don't have a first name, but I just need as many numbers as you could give me under the last name Harth. Well, how do you spell it? H-A-R-T-H, okay? Do you know what borough? Now, I don't know if you guys know about New York, but we have 5 boroughs. We've got Bronx, Manhattan, we've got Staten Island, Queens, and we got Brooklyn. So the operator, proceeds to say, well, sir, I mean, can you give me a little bit more to work with here? You don't have a first name. Yes, you give me a last name, but let's try to work with a borough at least. So I said, okay, fine. Let's start with Queens. So she gave me the list, and I kept calling back. I said, thank you. I'd hang up. I'd call back again. Sometimes we've got to persevere. We really are trying to get to a goal, and we've got to keep at it. So I called in again, and I called in again. And each time I gave them a different borough, and I received a different set of numbers. So by the time I was done, I had about 40 numbers total. And I went through each and every one of those numbers. And I can't explain how I knew, but I could tell by the sound of the voice that either they were not African American, I'm sorry ladies and gentlemen, but we have a way, okay, of communicating. And I just knew, okay? And it was the second to last number. Will you keep pressing or will you throw in the towel? And I was at the point where I was like, well, what's the point? I mean, I've called every other number and there was either a voicemail or it was someone that couldn't possibly be who I thought, was my family. And I said, I'm going to call this last number. What the heck? And when I called that number, it floored me. The woman who answered that phone said, hello. It sounded like she was waking up. And I said, ma'am, I'm sorry to disturb you, but my name is, and I used my real name. My name is Michael Raymond Hart, and I'm looking for my family. Do you know of a child who was born on November 29th? And she was still kind of coming, to herself, because I had just awakened her from her nap. And it just so happens, she told me this years later, it was my first cousin, by the way, and she told me this years later, she said, I was pregnant, and I was having a hard day, and they sent me home early, so when you called, I just plopped on the couch, and the phone rang, and it was you. So my cousin proceeds to say, well, what was your name? And I said, Michael Raymond Hart. She said, no. Mickey? I'm like, I don't know the Mickey, but I know Michael Raymond Hart. Then she said something that absolutely took my breath away. She said, if memory serves me correct, weren't you the child that was placed in Angel Guardian Home? I said, whoa, 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 whoa. I said, okay, how did you know that? How could you possibly have known that? She said, because I'm your first cousin, and we've been looking for you for 18 years. She said, 5 years ago, before you called, I told everyone, Michael's going to call, Mickey's going to call, and I'm going to be the one to receive that call. Now, my cousin was married, and the phone was listed in her maiden name, which was Hart. All of my siblings and everybody else who were much older, they're all married to you and have different names. So her number was the only number that I could call to make that connect. And she said, yeah, and then she was just, total excitement. Oh, your mother's still living, and she's this, and your sister, and she has 2 children, and oh my God! And I'm like, okay, and mind you, this is the day before Thanksgiving. My mom was out Thanksgiving shopping. At the moment of that discovery, the door flung open, and my mother yelled, Michael, get down here and help me with these groceries. And I'm like, oh my Lord. I said, and I'm on my mother's phone, and she said not to go in her room and use her phone. I said, oh Lord, so I gotta put it back nice and neat, so she went, but I was like, forget it. I said, Mom, come in, 1 moment. I said, can you hold on just 1 second, please? Because she's like, yes. She said, she's go handle your business, and I'm gonna be right here. And she waited for me. I went downstairs, I brought in the groceries, situated everything, and while I was in the kitchen with Mom, I said, Mom, I think I found my family. She was like, just put the butter in the refrigerator and put the cans up on top there. And I said, okay. After I did that, I said, Mom, can I please be excused? She says, yes. I ran back upstairs. And I said, thank you so much for holding. And I said, this is too much. This is too much. She says, I know. And she's about to go into one of her other, spells like, and this. I'm like, wait, just calm down. Can I call you back when things settle down? And I did. And welcome this evening. And it was really, really an exciting time. But things got really uncomfortable because there was some real tough conversation that needed to be had. And once the dust settled, my mother was like, what did you tell me earlier? downstairs in the kitchen. By this point, she's, winding down for the night, had her cigarette, had her little screwdriver, and she's feeling good, and it just finally sunk in, what did he say? And so, she's like, Michael, front and center. She knows Michael, front and center. I'm like, oh Lord, what did I do now? But Mom had to raise all 7 of us with an iron fist, you see, and I'm grateful for it, because none of us was in prison or anything like that, as a single mother, because Dad had passed, early on, and so she had to raise all of us by herself. And so when she said Michael front and center, she didn't have to say it a second time. I was there. Yes, ma'am. And she says, I want you to have a seat. And she said, when were you going to tell me that you were trying to find your first family? And it was hard for me to really put that into words, because it wasn't like it was premeditated. It was like spontaneous. I mean, I had a calling card, and it was 20 minutes. And, oh wow! Montel Williams was on, and I'm like, oh, he was notorious for his reunion shows. Come on, you pulled out some Kleenex whenever any one of his reunion shows came on. Okay, so I was right there with you. Okay, and it was like, oh my goodness, if they could do it, I could do it. And it just happened? She was like, yeah, right. Well, after several conversations, I said, Mom, things are moving along, and I want to meet them. And to be honest with you, she said, you will not. And we had to work through that. We did. Respectfully, we had to play this dance a little bit, but I was going. I was 18. It was my time to really exert my independence. I'm doing it. And no disrespect to you, this is the number, this is the address. I'll talk to you when I get back. So along the way, I was still respectful, but I still had to own what I did and follow through. And if I hadn't followed through, I wouldn't have been able to embark on such a rich journey of discovery, because the reunion happened. It was fabulous. It felt as if I'd never left. And I saw my sister, I saw my mom, my first mother, I should say. And seeing her was like going to the motherland. And I use that term because when we think of the motherland, it's the source. I went back to the source. And even though I was standing, looking at my source right across from me, yet it was still unfamiliar. Even though I looked like her, I had her same complexion. I'm seeing a reflection of myself looking back at me, but I don't know you. And so we began that journey of connecting, of affirming forgiveness. And it really took a while to just allow for those tough conversations to be had. And it wasn't a whole barrage of questions. In my mind, when I fantasized about the reunion, I'm like, I'm going to ask them about this, I'm going to ask them about that, I'm going to get all the answers in one sitting. No. We had to, who are you? What is your name? Where do you come from? What is your family like? And we came at it from that perspective. And we started with the present, and we didn't really delve too much into the past. That came when folks were smoking and drinking and playing cards. And folks like to tell stories. You know how family get. You know what I'm saying? When they start getting loud and folks start playing either spades or pinochle or hearts or whatever it is that your family do as a pastime, and folks get comfortable. See, that's when the lid is off the pot, that's when you drop your ladle. You see, when the lid is off the pot, you drop that ladle, you get all that you could get. And sometimes I would just have my phone. I had like a handheld recorder at that time. And I would record a lot of things. Or I would try to remember certain conversations so vividly. Then at night, I would always bring a pad with me and I would just jot down, names that I heard and places. Because I figured, I'm going to rehearse this stuff so that I can do further research. Well, I had 7 years with my birth mother. 7 years. Until one day, she closed her eyes and never woke up again. And at this time, it was 2003. It was in May when I graduated. But when I got the news that she had passed, it was in January of 2003. And I had this vision of both sides of my families coming together, celebrating me graduating, and both mothers would be there standing proud. And so that didn't happen. And so there was yet another loss, because I didn't get a chance to get into those deeper questions. What I learned is that shortly after my mother had a nervous breakdown, this is actually shortly after she had me, she experienced a nervous breakdown. She could not regain her former self again. She literally had a psychotic break and had to be institutionalized. So over the course of those years, the tough medications, it really just destroyed, it negatively impacted her motor skills. We would have conversations, but then it would fall into a loop. Oh, I remember when you and Tanya, that was my sister, we were all at the apartment, and then the fire happened, and then it would go in that direction. And I would let her, just kind of talk it out, but she was stuck there. But I had all my children. I had all my children. And I don't know what happened. I don't know where you went or why you were taken. I had my job. I had a good job. And they took that away from me too. Here was a woman who had experienced extreme loss. I went one way, she went another way, Tanya went with her father. And so, by the blessing of the Lord, when we came back together again during that time in '96, and we experienced those 7 years, 7 is the number of completion. When she breathed her last, my sister said this to me. She said, a week before Mom passed, we sat in the kitchen, and they still had her on all those medications. She had medications to stay awake, to go to sleep, to just be able to conversate. I mean, the medicine was enormous, insane. And she said, Tanya, this medicine is going to be the death of me. She said that. This medicine is going to be the death of me. And Tanya was like, well, Mom, why would you say that? She says, I want you to shed your tears and move on. You tell Michael I love him and that I'm proud that he was able to survive it all. And I'm grateful that he forgives me. And so there was new medication that was prescribed. And my sister, being an RN nurse, she administered the medication according to the instructions, and Mom went to sleep. And that was the last, and actually, right before, Tanya was just listening, kind of eavesdropping a little bit, and my mother was just praising the Lord and thanking God for sending her family back. And she's like, thank you, Lord. Thank you for my children. Thank you that I can spend the rest of my days in the company of my children. We had 7 years. That's Christmases and alternating Christmases and Thanksgiving. And I don't know how I did it, but I was able to kind of do this balancing act between both families and not even be fazed by it. Of course, folks were jealous over the time that I felt, I divided, on one side to the other, but I respected them equally the same. Honor thy mother and your father, that your days shall be long upon the earth. That was instilled in me. That came from my adopted mother teaching me that. And so I applied that into this situation. And so just as much as I honored her, I honored the woman who gave me life. And so she breathed her last. And yet a new chapter opened up. This new chapter would allow me to begin to meet the eldership of the family. Can you believe in the 7 initial years in reunion, not one elder was mentioned or introduced? It wasn't until the funeral. You know how it is when Aunt May died, you know what I'm saying? Cousin Bobo and Uncle Willie gonna come out to work. They're gonna come all the way from Nashville, Tennessee. Lord, I'm so sorry for your loss. And that's when you get a chance to meet some of these other relatives. And that's exactly what happened. I met Uncle Bud. Uncle Bud said, boy, you look just like your mama. He said, let me tell you something. He said, now, have you met Aunt Audrey? I said, no. Now, Aunt Audrey, she's really your mama's cousin, but she had about 15 years, so they just called her Aunt Audrey. So I'm going to give you her number. She's in Massachusetts. You just call her, and she can set you straight with the family history. Because I had went to Uncle Bud to try to get some more information, and he really didn't know as much as I thought he would know, even though he was in his 60s, you see. He was a truck driver. He was always away from home, so things got lost. But Aunt Audrey, she was the family historian. And I'm sure if you think about it, you can think about that one person in your family who keeps an impeccable record of the family history. And so I called Aunt Audrey. And Aunt Audrey connected me, or at least made me aware about our connections to North Carolina. And this is where things really started to get interesting, because I was starting to delve deeper and deeper into genealogy. And by this point, I had graduated from IUP. It's 2003, already had the funeral, met Aunt Audrey, continued that conversation. Now I moved to Pittsburgh by 2005. And so I'm still maintaining those relationships and what have you, learning new things. And so Aunt Audrey connects me to Cousin Richard. And Cousin Richard tells me about the family booklet that could help in my efforts. And then, of course, I plugged into when I moved here, I plugged into the African American Genealogical and Historical Society led by Miss Marlene Branson. And she was, at that time, she was giving a lot of genealogy workshops. And so I was really getting more and more involved with this genealogy stuff. Because remember, the first 7 years of my reunion, we talked nothing about genealogy, no elders or nothing. Now, I was really gaining some traction, And I'm meeting Uncle Richard, I'm talking to Aunt Audrey, Uncle Bud, and everything, So it was just like, this is good. And Uncle Richard told me about a cousin down in North Carolina who actually had the family genealogy book. Yes. And his name is Lomax. I love that name. Ain't that a cool name? Hey, Lomax. You got that genealogy book, what I'm saying? Hey, Lo, what I'm saying? But it was like, he had this little leaflet-sized genealogy booklet that was tucked up in the closet in this little shoebox. It was like maybe 10 pages. It had everything and more that I needed. It was the first time that I saw a record, a genealogical record that had my birth mother's name on it. But there was another name on there that would lead me to discover this historic connection to child welfare. And the name is Lonnie Evans. With genealogy, you start off by looking at the census records. At this point, you start with 1940, and you go back every 10 years. And once you go through the process of finding out what your family has and what have you, then you begin to organize that information by using certain information sheets, family group sheets and what have you, to kind of have everybody organized. After you've gone through that process, then you go to the census records. And then you start looking at the household, 1940, go back another 10 years, 1930, 1920, and so forth and so on. For the African American genealogical research, our task is to go from 1940 to 1870. Because once you get to 1870, now we're tapping into the pre-Civil War era of family research. So now you need to look at the 1860. Are they listed in the free schedule census, or are they listed in the slave schedules? But with Lonnie, he wasn't even born during the time of slavery, but he was found in the 1910 census, so that was exciting. But in the 1900 census, I found the names of his parents, Badge Evans. Man, I love that name, Badge. You got no accent, you got Badge, Bad never jammer, And I'm gonna tell you something right now. When I found out about Badge, I noticed that he lived during the time of the slave economy. And so, what we do when we're doing genealogy is, for African Americans at least, we want to first see if that same household that we found in 1870, do they also appear in the free schedule census in 1860? Or if they don't appear in the 1860 free schedule census, then chances are you're looking at an ancestor who was impacted by slavery. And that's a whole nother beast and research process. But thankfully, in this case, I found Badge. I found him in the free schedule census, but you won't believe the household breakdown. Now, I alluded earlier that I was adopted by the Williams family, an African-American Williams family. Dad was from the Bronx, my mother was from Philadelphia, but was raised in Harlem as well, and they raised their children in Brooklyn. Do you know when I found Badge, he was living in an interracial family where the head of the household was a man by the name of William B. Williams. What are the odds of that? I'm like, what? Now, at this point, there was no evidence of a tie to the historical backdrop of child welfare in this country. But it was definitely curious. I'm like, why is it? Now, Badge, his last name was Evans, but yet the head of the household, which was an elderly couple, their names were Williams. And there were other children who were of different races who had different last names. What's going on here? Well, and I'm thinking, well, were they stolen? And they were like, another form of slavery, we just don't know, were they relatives? That was a possibility. And so, when you embark on your genealogy, you start with the census records online, but then to get the juicy records, you gotta go to the archives. You gotta go to the state archives, oftentimes, and the National Archives in DC. And so, once I narrowed down where the state archives were, I said, I need some additional help. And the training that I got from being a part of the Pittsburgh chapter of AUGS really gave me that foundation. And so I told my genealogy mentor, Ms. Branson, I said, Ms. Branson, I'm going, to North Carolina to the state archives, and I got this case that's really, really interesting. And she said, okay, let me know what you find, when you come back. And so I went down to Raleigh and I presented the material that I had. And so the archivist said, have you ever considered that maybe this Badge Evans ancestor of yours, he was my great-great-grandfather, by the way. This is Nana's grandfather. And so he said, have you ever considered that maybe your Badge Evans may have been apprenticed? I said, no, what do you mean? He said, well, looking at this particular 1860 census, and considering the age of your ancestor, and I'm seeing there's other Evanses in this household, it is a possibility that your ancestors could have been a part of the orphan train movement. And I said, I don't understand. He said, well, in short, between the years of 1850 and 1933, there was this mass movement of approximately 300,000 both white and black children that were being farmed out all across the United States. And the ringleader of this whole trend was a guy by the name of Charles Lloyd Brace of the Children's Aid Society in New York. How interesting how New York comes up yet again. As I'm learning all of this, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And so he was farming children throughout the New England states, and basically it was an unregulated apprenticeship that he was kind of coordinating. There was an obvious need that these orphaned children needed to be placed. He had a staff of what we would call today caseworkers or social workers who accompanied these children to the trains en route to their assigned home. And usually these kids would be utilized to work the farms or whatever else that needed to be done. Approximately 300,000 children that was a part of this experience. Simultaneously, at the county level, excuse me, at the county level, there was a highly organized and highly regulated process through the Common Court of Pleas. And there was a division known as the Orphans Court. And so there I was standing across from this veteran archivist at the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm presenting him my 1860 census record. That book, that ancestral booklet that I told you that Uncle Lomax gave me, so I had that there too. And then he's giving me this wonderful education about, well, let's take a look and see if your ancestor had been apprenticed. And if we find a record, then my friend, you have just opened up Pandora's box, because there's a lot of records, untapped records, which is an important part of American history and the development of child welfare in this country. Well, guess what? We found a record. The date on the record nearly floored me. Not only did the census record, I told you I came down with that census record, not only did the census record show the head of household being this white Williams family, raising my ancestors, okay? But now I've just unearthed a document that showed that he was apprenticed and that it was coordinated through the courts in Orange County in North Carolina. The date was November 29th, 1851. That's 127 years before I was born to the day. To the day. I stood there in that office and I was like, you're kidding me. He was like, this is it. And there's court documents, there's court minutes. There was all this whole other set of records that to look through. And there were scores of cases of black and white children passing through the child welfare system in Orange County in North Carolina. That's just one little example. But from 1850 to 1933, there were thousands, tens of thousands of children that were being transported from one part of the country to the next. And so there I was in total amazement, and it came back around full circle. And I really began to think back to that time. See, during the time of these records existed, you also had the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And that meant that whether you were free or not, if they were able to snatch you up, you could be thrown back in slavery. But for this particular Williams household in 1860 and again in 1850, I found him, he was very protective of the children that were in his care. He was providing a form of foster care at that time to all of these children. And it was just an amazing epiphany, to see how it was just so serendipitous, because here I am in my day, having gone through foster care, and then I have my great pre-Civil War ancestor also experiencing foster care in its beginning stages, as it were, and was being cared for a Williams family just like I was cared for by a Williams family. It was just amazing. It was unreal. It was mind-blowing. And so I think the broader message here is that family is such an elastic term, and is so inclusive of everything, of so many people. I think about shows today like The Modern Family, This Is Us. Have you guys seen any of those shows? I mean, these shows are amazing, and they really speak to such diversity within. There were white households who were risking their lives taking care of black, free African-American children. Anything could have happened to them and to the children, but for some reason or another, this particular family was very protective of the children that was in their care. And so, the legacy continues. Foster care, National Fostercare Awareness Month. This is the time to really acknowledge all of you and all of those who are connected to you, who are doing a really good job in taking care of the children that are in their care. Celebrate them. Let them know they're doing a great job. And know that families are hurting. Families are hurting, but it takes a village to raise a child. And now at this point in time in the presentation, I want to open it up to Q&A. I know I've covered a lot. We've gone through my river journey and my reunion. We've talked about the actual meeting of the elders, and then that whole genealogy piece. And so I also want to include this. 2011, I got involved with direct-to-consumer DNA testing. My first experience was with a company called 23andMe. And I can't begin to tell you how gratifying of an experience it was, because for the first time since my first mother's passing, I was able to really look at the diversity from a molecular standpoint. I mean, there was a little bit of Mississippi masala mixing up in there, Got some European, got some Pacific Islander in there, some Native American, a whole bunch of African. In fact, when I found out about the African portion, I actually went to a Babalawo and had an ancestral roots reading done. But that's for another lecture. But I will tell you this. Today, families are using the DNA mapping technology that exists in the direct-to-consumer DNA testing industry, and siblings are finding each other. Families are reconnecting. And this has been a tremendous and immense tool to really help in that healing process, because when you go through closed adoption, like I said before, your birth record is changed. If your birth record is changed, you don't know who you once were. And so now you're able to recover that information and your roots can be grounded. And it's just, when it comes to identity, there's so many different layers, but we're really a composite of three major parts to our identity. We come from the heredity. We are part of our identity makeup comes from the social community that we're connected to, and the decisions that we make in life. And all of those components are important to making sure that we are sound and secure in our identity. And with the ancestral piece, it just really allowed me to feel like I was connected to the world, because I didn't have to just focus on one single aspect of my ancestry, and we live in such a globalized time that it actually allowed me to appreciate the diversity that does exist. And so tonight, I want you to think about the children, not only in Allegheny County. I know in my work in dealing with CASA and Three Rivers Adoption Council, those two organizations alone are really working hard to create a lot of awareness and making sure that these children are placed in safe and secure homes. What could we do to be able to contribute in the area of mentorship, in the area of just holistic healing? There's something that we could do. There's a program that we could start. There's an organization, there's OMA. Maybe you have something you can plug into OMA and really kind of help this movement of encouraging this healing process, because we are evolving more and more as we peel back those layers of trauma. We've got a story, you heard one tonight, and I bet if each and every one of us got a chance to stand up here and tell our stories, we would all be amazed. But I end my session tonight, and I challenge you to call that friend, call that sister, call that coworker who you know is doing the best that they possibly can with the children that they have in their home. Encourage them. Maybe think about opening up your home to fostering. I know that is certainly a desire of mine. And so for right now, my work with CASA, I just was a part of the superhero run, race for kids, that CASA puts on every year. And it's a way of creating awareness, raising monies to be able to make sure that these kids have what they need. I know in Allegheny County, some of the latest statistics is about maybe 3,000 children in Allegheny County alone who are in foster care, and upwards of about 60% are African American. But all of the kids that are in care, they are really needing to be in a safe and secure environment. So it takes that village effort yet again. So I thank you so much tonight. I'm going to turn the mic back over to Gail or Anita, whichever one. And thank you so much. If you have any questions, feel free. I'm available to answer. Yes.
Thank you very much. This was terrific, really.
Thank you.
What I want to ask about
Is that mic on? Can you give her the mic?
okay. I was adopted myself, and I know
Be turned
a lot
on.
of people who are.
Yes.
And Pennsylvania, in the past few years,
I don't think it's on.
opened most of the open adoption records.
Yes.
Yeah, for people who are, I guess, over 21. Unless there is a veto, I think, submitted. I'm not sure exactly how this works, but I think the birth parent can submit a veto. But do you have any idea about how these records That is, do you know people who are trying to open their records, having been born in Pennsylvania, succeeded?
Thank you so much for that. Well, I have my left hand mic, so it's good. but it's a great question. She's asking about the open records movement. Adult adoptees in Pennsylvania are trying to advocate for the opening of their records so that they can get their original birth certificate, some of their health records, and what have you. And what's the status on that? I believe that's what you're asking, right?
Yeah, I think they actually were open about a year ago, officially. And so I wondered if you had, heard from people who had that experience and got some information and then wanted you to come and get some more information.
Sure. Well, for Pennsylvania, as far as I know, is still a closed adoption state, just like New York is. States like Rhode Island, New Jersey, Illinois, Oregon, there's about maybe 17 states total that actually have agreed to make changes in legislation to open up their records to adult adoptees. I think that the struggle is still ongoing here in Pennsylvania. I personally have not been able to meet an adult adoptee who have actually was successful in obtaining those original birth records. There's the American Adoption Congress, which is a lobby interest group. I think they're based out of DC, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a great website and a great resource for adult adoptees who are at that stage in life where they're trying to find out how to go about doing that. But it's an arduous task, but I mean, it's in progress for sure. But thank you for asking that question. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did have a child who I gave up for adoption back in 1969, 70. And you can now get through to the child birth certificates in Pennsylvania. There's a process that you would go through. And one of the contacts is Child Youth Services right here in, I think it's in Highland Park.
That's beautiful.
Okay, so I have information, I just don't have it with me, but I'd be glad to share it if you'd like.
That'd be great. I mean, well, I'm from New York, so New York is still, on edge about that.
Right.
But for those, I think this young lady here may give information she can pass along.
Yeah, I'll share that with you.
For sure. Anyone else? Anyone else have any questions? Whoops.
Question I have is, I just recently found out my sister out this.
Yep, we do.
My sister I just recently found out my sister had given a child for a house. How do I make myself available for someone to be that?
That's a great question. So a family member, he recently found out that a family member placed a child up for adoption, and he wants to know how does he make himself available in case that child wants to reconnect. Well, what you want to do is you want to register your information with a state adoption registry, okay? Sometimes there's county registries, but generally there's state registries, and those adoption registries are actually they're managed by intermediaries. So you would put your information on there, the child would have to register their information, and then the intermediary would actually broker that reunion. Yeah, that's how they would do that. Yeah.
Because also too, my niece would be the child's sister, but also saying she's open. But I know the mother has other issues, other traumas. She's not prepared, nor we know how.
Sure. Well, you would definitely, registering your information on an adoption registry. I think adoptionregistry.com or .org is a website. I believe that's the website, but I mean, definitely with a lot of DNA testing companies, as long as your genetic information is in the database, and let's say that child tests with a company, the DNA mapping technology would be able to map the degree of relationship. So they can dictate whether or not a person is a first cousin, an uncle, that kind of thing. which is exciting, but also very scary, you know. So, but it is interesting. But adoption registry would be the way to do it so that it can be brokered by an intermediary. Yeah, and also with the open records, I just want to kind of throw this out there too. For many adoptees who are seeking their original birth certificate, states need time to track down the birth parents because there is a clause that says that there's a contact preference if they want to be contacted or not. And I personally agree with that. I think that if a particular parent, you know, surrendered their child for whatever reason, I think they are owed the option to say whether or not they want to be contacted. You know, and and not all adoptees are trying to make a connection with their first family. Let's just be honest. You know, many of them are perfectly content, and if it's ancestry you want, and you don't want any of that interpersonal stuff, take a DNA test. That's what many are doing, and they're finding community that way. You know. Yes.
You know, sort of looking up your genealogies isn't for wimps.
Oh yes.
Because
not for the faint-hearted, that's for sure. Yeah.
Because I know I did one of these telephone things to just find some other Dickersons.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, old guy, answered and said, well, I don't know if you're going to be too successful at what you want to do, because my grandma told me that the master took Joel to town in the buggy, and when he came back with someone else, and he told, you know, what's her name? I forget who it was, Mary or something. This is your new husband, and we're going to call him Joel.
Well, that sounds like drama to me, y'all. Yeah.
And that's what I mean. This is not for wimps.
Yes. But it's juicy. It is juicy. I mean, you can find some juicy stuff when you're doing genealogy. I mean, some murders, some other families, you know, that no one knew about. I mean, it's some interesting stuff. Maybe somebody ran a brothel, you know. I'm telling you, you know, our ancestors did some crazy stuff.
Brother Mike, yeah, that was a powerful presentation, brother.
Thank you.
I found myself thinking about, you talking about you found a sense of rootedness in place.
Yes.
And I was fortunate to grow up with my biological.
Mm-hmm.
And listening to you, it made me wonder, why was I just satisfied with having that knowledge and not wanting to go back further to my Afrocentric roots? Now, I know you've done both. You did your foster and you went back further.
Yes.
And it sounds like it was a very spiritual experience. I'm hearing the way that you're talking about these things happening. Can you talk a little bit about how that's kind of enhanced your identity? Because now I feel like, man, you know, I've kind of truncated my own identity by just stopping at my American self. So for you, what did, you know, going even back further, what did that do for, you know, who you are and who you conceptualize yourself to be?
That's an excellent question, because genealogy is not just about names and dates and places. It's about finding a personal connection. And in my process of really understanding all of my connections, the work that I do now and working with families and helping them to retrace and reconnect and reunite really is in keeping with what I learned when I met with the Babalawo. You know what he told me? He said that your people were ancestral priests. And I didn't even tell him the work that I do. But he said your forebears worked as ancestral priests. And in the West African traditions, particularly in the Ifa spiritual systems, there's many concepts that involve the interrelationships between the present world and the ancestral world. And if you are to do anything, you must remember and pay homage to those who came before you. And so I thought it was so enriching, because I'm like, wow. I said, this is a deep personal connection, because I never even knew that. Now, the flip side of that is that I've realized that I'm stronger than I know. I'm stronger than I know, than I realize, you know. And when you take an accounting of what your ancestors went through so that you can be here today, that boat ride that they left from Europe to come to America so that your grandparents can have the opportunities that they had so that you can be able to enjoy what you have today. It's really, it's humbling. That journey humbled me. It induced a great sense of empathy for stories of displacement, stories of separation, and that grit to kind of make lemonade out of lemons, honey. Because every last one of our ancestors had to give up something to go after something that they've never known before. Dr. Isabel Wilkerson, in her book, The Warmth of Other Suns, that's a common theme. She talks about the Great Migration and how many folks, you know, in the South were escaping, you know, racial violence. And when they arrived in cities like Pittsburgh and New York and Chicago and what have you, they were confronted with this bottleneck of all of these other immigrants who were running from persecution within their own lands, trying to start over, trying to make a new life. And so if they could do it, if they can endure, then I certainly can press through and endure as well. So it definitely, that was a great question. Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
So I just wanted to make I don't know, maybe it's like more of a comment than a question. One of the things that you just mentioned a second ago was the whole issue of separation. So when I look at my life, it wasn't about separation because I was adopted. It was about separation because there was a break between my mother and my father's side of the family. So I spent my whole entire childhood, all the way up until I was my freshman year in college, not really knowing my paternal side of the family. I knew of them. I knew their names. I knew where they kind of lived in the Pittsburgh area and all of that, but I didn't. And so I grew up with a sense that, like, I literally had an identity crisis because I'm trying to figure out, like, here's this family that I'm associated with, but there's things about me that are different. Like, where did these things come from? And then in my freshman year at Pitt is when one of my aunts called me on the phone and said, you need to connect with your grandmother. And so she gave me the phone number of my grandmother's sister. And I called and we ultimately made that connection. And the first time I saw my grandmother, I took a bus ride from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. It was the first time I ever was in Philadelphia.
Wow.
And I didn't know what she looked like. I didn't know anything. All I knew was I need to go meet my grandmother. I stepped off the bus. She recognized me.
Wow.
And the reason she recognized me, the first thing she said to me is, you look just like your father.
Wow.
And I can't even tell you how powerful that moment was because it began to clarify a lot of things. And as I got to know my grandmother, I was like, oh, I'm like you.
Yes.
That's why I had this thing that was missing because I couldn't find who's that person in my family tree over here that I'm like, and it was her.
Wow.
So, yeah, that separation can be really powerful when it comes in different forms.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And that is powerful. And again, it goes back to this idea, and I see you, Lou. It goes back to this whole thing of when we do genealogy correctly, we begin to gain clarity about ourselves. We begin to see ourselves, we begin to see our ancestors struggle and the giftings and their talents within our own selves. It might be expressed slightly differently, but we can begin to make that personal connection. And that's powerful. That's awesome. Luke?
Yeah, well, this is not a real question, but of course, I grew up in Ohio. I grew up outside of Youngstown. And I actually grew up in a very close-knitted community, actually founded by migrating blacks and runaway slaves. So what happened was my oldest sister, my late oldest sister, she ended up having a baby while being married.
Okay, that happens.
So the baby had to be given up for adoption.
Right.
And so, for some strange reason, she was right there in Youngstown area all the time.
The whole time? Wow.
Yeah, but we probably crossed in the path all the time. So what happened one day, she had a job, and she was at work. And someone walked up to her and said, "Excuse me, what is your name?" So she tells her. She said, "What's your last name?" She told her. She said, "No, it's not." No, it's not. She said, she tells her the last name, and I won't call her.
Sure.
She said, this is your last name.
Right.
She tells her, and your mother's name is this, your dad's name is this.
Right.
Your grandmother, my mother, is named Orly. And this, so of course she went home to the doctor there, which was a pastor. And what happened was, that was back like in the middle 80s. Well, of course, our older sister, our late older sister, my late mother, well, they want to meet somebody else.
Genealogy can make people want to fight, you know what I'm saying?
And that's how we found. But they would tell us all the time, they would tell all the boys all the time, you gotta be careful when you date.
Ain't that the truth?
It might be your niece.
Oh my
It might be your
goodness.
niece.
Right.
So, but as soon as we saw her,
You know.
we just went, oh my God.
Wow.
She looked just like her mother and father. Just like
Wow. Split down the middle.
Of course, we all in contact now for 30 years. Now we all stay in contact.
Right.
We knew about it. And my cousin Mary said, wait a minute, cousin Louis, where did she come from? And I said, do you remember when we used to go up the street and play, and all of a sudden, Pat had a daughter? Yeah, I do remember that. Yes, sir.
Wow.
One time, all of a sudden, the bastard's wife had a daughter.
Wow.
That's her.
Wow. Lots of secrets, skeletons in the closet, I'll say that much. When you give,
I'm all of a sudden, boy, they're going to beat somebody up.
I'm sure of it. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Well, I want to thank all of you tonight, for enduring tonight. I know you could have been anywhere else, but you chose to come here. And I hope that something was said that really inspired you, or that sparked a flame to keep pressing on, to encourage that foster parent, or to maybe be that foster parent. But definitely, there's lots of work to be done, and it takes a village to make it happen. Thank you.